When was Silver founded?
About 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, still quite young.
And you were inspired by?
My age.
Okay.
Well, my background is in the advertising industry, and I had managed, thousands of advertising campaigns across many countries of Asia Pacific and the United States. And I think when I started to get up in years, dare I say, past the 50 mark, I realized that the ad industry was obsessed with youth and had completely turned a blind eye to me. So it started out very
ironically,
selfish.
you are in the ad agency yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I said, this is strange, and I started to look at the statistics. And when you look at the statistics, very quickly you realize that, this is the wealthiest, the fastest growing, and the largest segment of the population across most of the developed countries of Asia Pacific and many of the developing countries. And I just thought, something's got to be done. And, I love a challenge. And so I took it on. I guess what fascinates me about this is some people think they get it. Some companies think they get it, and they
might even have an in-house department working on this,
and they get it terribly wrong. Usually because, and there's a number of reasons. I think one of them is that most of the marketing teams, if we talk about marketing and communications here, most of them are in their late 20s, early 30s. And when they think about an older consumer, they think in the terms of their parents. And when you communicate, when you talk to your parents, it's very different if someone of the same age, of their 50s and 60s, are talking to a 50 and 60-year-old. I'll give you a classic example. I was in Singapore. I opened a new bank account, and my former bank, I won't mention the name, a very famous global bank, approached me with a relationship manager who was, I guess, in his early 30s. And I remember at one meeting we celebrated the fact that he had his first child. Then I opened an account with another bank, not because he celebrated the birthday of the child. I opened with another bank, and the lady that came to meet me, the relationship manager, was in her 50s. And within 2 minutes she was saying, where do your kids go to university? Where do you want them to go to university? And I said, Australia. And she said, well, have you got a position on the Australian dollar? Now that is a sort of thing that only a person of that age would think about, Whereas talking with a much younger relationship manager, I didn't get that kind of empathy or advice. It's a subtle thing, but it helps unleash my wealth, and that bank consequently got my business.
So there are rooms of opportunities in this industry.
Massive. The other thing I find, interesting or quite sad is that when we talk about the older consumer, the assumption is that we're talking about products specifically designed for or marketed to older people, like assistive aids, hearing aids, walking aids, diapers for older people. And just an interesting aside there, last year was the first time in history that there were more diapers sold in Japan to older people than there were to babies.
How scary.
Yeah, that's scary. That's scary. In fact, in Thailand, I think in 2011, 200 million diapers were sold to adults here. 200 million pieces. Yeah.
So how do we fix this state of people or agencies concerned living in denial that this is not happening? I think that's one of the reasons of this not taking off sooner than it should.
Well, I think, just to give you a couple of statistics that I love to throw around, in terms of the power of people over 50 in normal, everyday product purchases. And these numbers come from different countries, different markets and regions of the world, but it might be a surprise to the listeners that 46% of all Apple computers are sold to people over the age of 55. 46% of Apple
Were
computers.
they buying for their kids?
No. Well, they may be that as well. It's interesting you mentioned that. I can come back to the whole issue of toys in a minute. 20% of all toys in the United States are sold to people over 50. Oh. Why? For their grandchildren. Are they ever targeted? No, they're not. And this is a big lost opportunity. 50% of all face care and cosmetics sold to people over the age of 50.
Mickey's in it.
49% of consumer packaged goods. In the United States alone, that amounts to about $230 billion of sales a year. $230 billion a year. 80% of all luxury travel is booked by people over the age of 50, not surprisingly. So when you start to talk about that, I hope businesses will start to say, look, there is a demographic reality. Demographics don't lie. They are published by the United Nations and they are, cast in stone. So we know that the numbers are out there. We know that they are disproportionately wealthy. 52% of all high net worth individuals across Asia Pacific are over the age of 50. 52%. Across the Asia Pacific region, people over the age of 65 have around $2 trillion of spending power a year. And I think, if my memory serves me, that number in Thailand, among people over the age of 65, annual spending power in 2015 will be $15 billion.
You talk about wealth, but one thing I noticed, like the richer you get, the stingier you become.
That is so true.
And the younger people, they spend faster. They don't think much, and it's not their money as well; it's their parents' money.
Yeah.
So.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. And I think of course, I have my own agenda here to try and promote the power of the older consumer. But let us not for 1 minute suggest that younger consumers are not important and should be ignored. I mean, I think the difference, though, and thing that I, from a marketing point of view, I try to convince businesses is that once upon a time, the automatic reaction was to market products based on age. We will develop a mobile phone and we'll sell it to people 20 to 30 years of age. Well, I think that's an absolute nonsense. There are very few categories anymore. Fashion would be one of them. Children's toys would be another, that deserve specific age-based marketing. And I think it's much wiser to look across ages at lifestyles and attitudes that are common across ages, because someone who was a backpacker in their 20s, me for example, was likely to be a backpacker in their 60s, or want to have that kind of level of experience when they travel. They're not going to suddenly say, no, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to stay in a 6-7-star hotel. Someone who is an early adopter of technology and loves gadgets,
they will love gadgets,
is going to love gadgets for the rest of their lives, as long as they have the physical capability to use them. And this is the point. So, why is Apple 46% of all Apple computers sold to people over there? Because they don't define age. They don't define users by age. If you look at the Apple advertising, very seldom do they feature people at all. And if they do, usually they'll feature a grandchild sitting on grandpa's knee. So it says, look,
across the board.
And Apple said in a quote, they said, we appeal to customers from 1 to 100. And I thought that was brilliant. Coming from the world's largest, most successful company, I thought that was brilliant.
You cited 25 defects of our body.
Effects, not defects. Subtle difference.
I'm sorry.
Defect.
As we age, what about the cultural differences? Do you also provide that as well? Because I'm sure aging society from one country. If you go by the extreme, I mean, Japanese, elderly people will be so much different from American elderly
it's an excellent
society.
Point. And, I've fought this battle through my entire advertising career, where Western stereotypes have been overlaid onto Asian culture and have been a total misfit. So, for example, when we're talking about this subject, often you hear the expression baby boomer. And the assumption is that baby boomers are the same the world over. Well, of course, that is complete nonsense, because someone who was born between 1946 and 1964, which is the range of a baby boomer, in the United States is going to have a very, very different story to tell than someone who was born in China, for example, who lived through a cultural revolution versus the Americans who went through Korean and Vietnam War. So very, very different things that shape their culture. But I think, talking about Asia, I mean, you're absolutely right. Even within and across Asia Pacific, of course, we've got Anglo-Saxon cultures in Australia and New Zealand, which are very, very different. But even within the other societies, you have the dominance of the Confucian ethic, you know, and the Asian Indian subcontinent ethic of family orientation, this you know, filial piety, absolute respect for the elders, which is good in some ways. Of course, it's a fabulous concept, and it's one of the reasons why I'm living in Asia, not in you know, Anglo-Saxon society. But I think the downside of it is that among the older generation, they are holding themselves in reverence that a Western person will not. They will just say, look, don't treat me any differently. Just let me get on and enjoy my life, and I'll go and spend all my all the money and leave nothing for my next of kin. It's a very, very different dynamic. But from a marketing perspective, that also opens up opportunities. Because, for example, older people in Asian societies need to have permission to spend their own, to alleviate their own guilt. And there are ways in marketing and advertising that you can do that very effectively.
Since we are wrapping the hour, so how do we reach you? You're based in Singapore, right? Silver
I'm based in Singapore. You can Google me, Kim Walker at Silver, or silvergroup.asia.
Do you tweet? Do you Facebook?
I do. I tweet, I LinkedIn, I website, I blog, I do everything.
Yes. Kim Walker is the name you look for.
Kim Walker, yes, that's me.
And the organization is called Silver.
Silver Group.
Silver Group.
Silvergroup.asia.
Such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank
Wonderful
you so much.
to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank
Happy
you.
New Year to everybody.
We'll do a recap in Thai afterwards.
Now?
We have few minutes.
Yes, few minutes. So ก็คือว่าพอมาดูแล้วเนี่ยผมฟังตัวเลขใหญ่มากเลยนะคะ